We're going to show you today how to build a gate that will never sag out of 20-year-old half-rotten Scrapwood fence rails. These are the old fence rails we're going to use. Pretty rotten on the outside and the ends, but when you trim them up they're pretty nice. Now it was pretty cold today in the shed, only 4 degrees, so you'll see me wearing my warm puffer jacket throughout some of this video. In terms of hardware, we're going to use these heavy-duty hook and band hinges with an oval pad bolt to keep the gate shut. So you can see these slot together really easily. You can actually lift the gate off these at any time if you need to, or you can actually flip the top one upside down if you want to make it a bit more secure. So we'll kick this off by bringing out the miter saw. I'll do a separate video on a miter saw breakdown in a couple of weeks, but this is a sliding compound miter saw, great for making repeatable cuts, cross cuts across lengths of timber. So we start by cleaning off the end of the boards we're going to use and mark 124 centimeters or almost 49 inches on these boards. And it's always a good idea to mark off which piece is your scrap piece. I know it sounds silly for a cut like this maybe, but you'd be surprised when you're doing lots of repeated cuts how easy it is to make a mistake and cut incorrectly. So set up your stop block where you need it, clamp it down, and make 2 cuts on your lengths of timber. And these 2 cuts should be exactly the same length, as you can see when we compare them to each other. And we got some nice old growth here. For the vertical posts, we're going to cut these at 105 centimeters or just over 41 inches. Again, give a nice clean mark and mark off your scrap. And we're going to adjust our stop block accordingly, using 2 clamps for this. The last one was a bit wobbly. And then make your 2 repeated cuts. So it's always a good idea to do a dry fit to see if everything makes sense, and I wanted to check if this was square by comparing 2 opposite diagonal sides, and I was happy that this was looking very, very square at this point. Now we're going to mark up where we're going to do our cuts to make our half lap joints, and these joints are really the secret to this type of gate to give it all the strength that it needs. Good miter saws have a trench cut facility, and we're going to use this here. Normally this little piece is back, but when you pull it forward and adjust a little screw here, you can adjust how deep the miter saw cuts into your wood. And what we want to do here is cut halfway through our wood. So you can see here the first cut and how it's halfway through. I'll speed this up. You do a lot of these cuts to cut out most of the wood. Be careful at the end, as this bit can crack off and leave you with a little bit of a rough end. Now, my favorite piece, knocking out the pieces of wood that are left over. You can see that it's still quite rough here. So what you do need to do then is take care of this roughness. And you have maybe 2 choices here. One is to use a chisel, or this is the other option, where you slide the piece of wood back under the miter saw to chip off the remaining little stubbly bits of wood. I'm doing this in super slow motion here so you can see the bits being cut off. But it's a fairly quick process. It's a little bit sketchy, and if you're nervous of something like this, you can definitely just use a hand chisel to clean these up. And it might even give you a cleaner cut, to be honest. After the miter saw, I still like to use a hand chisel to clean up any last sticky out bits of wood here, just to ensure we get a nice strong glue up when we put this half lap against the other half lap. So I mark up where the half laps should go on the vertical pieces here. Do the same, and then when we put them together it looks a little bit like this. So I'm going to check things are square now and start putting in some bolts to start locking this all together. In total I'm going to use 4 bolts on each corner, but I'm going to start with just 2 bolts in each corner. That still gives us a little bit of wiggle room when we're trying to square it up finally before locking everything into place. So flip it over, drop it back onto the workbench and start preparing to glue everything up. So Gorilla Glue in a brush here in this case, plenty of glue, and make sure you get it on the shoulder piece, as this is very important to make sure everything is well bonded together. So time to put on some washers and nuts and start to tighten everything up, and you should get some squeeze out at this point. If you don't get some squeeze out, you might not have quite enough glue in there. So check again that everything is square with the diagonal measuring technique, and then you can screw in and bolt in the remaining bolts in each corner. So we're going to have 4 bolts in each corner. Again, very, very strong gate. 4 bolts, half lap joints, and plenty of glue means it's on its way to being a very solid gate. So wipe off any excess glue that's been squeezed out. And here's the gate now, before we put in the diagonal brace. So let's get this back up on the bench and put a brace underneath it, just like this. Now we don't need to do any measuring here, we just need to mark this up. So mark it up on each side, make sure these are nice and accurate, and then bring these back over to your miter saw and cut to these angles. Slot it into place, first on one end and then on the other. It should be a nice tight fit, we don't want this to be loose. Now to put these in place I'm going to use pocket screws, and I like to use these Torx or Starhead screws. I highly recommend you check these out. Now here we have the gate with the brace now in place, and I'm just going to put on a piece of trim on the top to protect the end grain from too much moisture. So cut this to size. I like to bring it over to my table saw and put a 45-degree angle on both sides at the top. This is to let the rainwater run off more easily. And this is what the final product looks like. Now before I glue and screw this trim to the top, I need to get rid of the excess length on some of my bolts. If you've got the right size bolts you won't need to do this, but I had to. So for the top trim, plenty of glue again. Then I'm going to clamp on the trim and screw that into place. So make sure you get plenty of glue, especially onto the end grain, because this really likes to soak up any moisture it can. You want that moisture to be glue rather than rainwater. So clamp it in place, nice and tight. You should get some squeeze out again, and send all of your screws home. And make sure to clean off any of the excess glue. Now I'm going to use Creo Coat on this. It's not Creosote, which is much more aggressive, but Creo Coat. So I needed to hang my gate. I hung it off a hook in my ceiling, and then I was able to get the paint on nice and easy. So I won't show you every step of it because it's just me painting a gate. So here's what the finished product looks like. So I gave it a day or two to really dry, but yeah, got a really good coat on the whole product here. Now for us, we want to use this gate to keep our dogs in, so we're going to add some chicken wire, and I'm going to use this staple gun to do that. Grab your chicken wire, lay it down on your gate, and start by stapling one corner down. Then use some quick clamps to stretch the chicken wire nice and taut. This takes a lot of the stress out of doing this type of project. Once you have it stretched nice and tight, you can then begin to staple down each of the sides. Really quite simple when you use clamps to help you with this process. So I just grabbed some snips to trim off the excess bits of wire. Make sure you snip it at the right point. You don't want to snip it too close to the staple, and then the wire might slip through the staple itself. And for some of these I needed to almost double staple them down to make sure I had a nice strong line of staples and wire at each side. So you can see here it's very, very taut, and also a very neat way of attaching wire. Here's a view from the flip side. So in terms of building a super strong gate that will never sag, we're essentially done here. I'm not going to show you how to hang or install these type of gates in any great detail, but again, I'm going to use these hook and band hinges, and to attach them you really do need quite a few tools. You need clamps sometimes, you need spirit levels maybe, drills, hammers, drivers and so on. Back out in the garden, this is where we're going to install the gate. Just like to say at this point, if you could subscribe, please do. It absolutely helps out this channel. This lower hinge is super important. The brace sends all the weight down to that hinge. So gate now, super strong. You can stand on this gate, it'll never sag. So very, very happy with this. So give it a shot. And as always, bye!